Located in the heart of Kansas along the Kansas River, Fort Riley is massive. Its facilities and training ranges cover over 101,000 acres of land, 159 square miles of prairie that has served as home to America's warriors for over a century and a half. The base houses at least 14 active duty units. Chief among these is the 1st Infantry Division, known as the Big Red One. It is the oldest continuously serving division in the United States Army, with a decorated combat record spanning from World War I to present-day operations. While Fort Riley boasts a proud military history dating from the Civil War era all the way to the present day, its history also includes dark chapters written in mass death and suffering. In the 1850s, a cholera outbreak swept through the camp, killing 125 soldiers whose bodies were buried in unmarked mass graves that remained somewhere beneath the modern base. Then in 1918, Fort Riley became ground zero for the Spanish influenza pandemic, the deadliest disease outbreak in human history. Thousands of soldiers fell ill in overcrowded barracks, hundreds died on site, and the virus spread from this single Kansas installation to kill millions worldwide. That concentration of death didn't just stain the soil, it fundamentally altered it. And what grew from that poisoned ground doesn't just haunt, it hunts. March 2019, 0200 hours. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen was conducting his 3rd rotation of security checks through Building 223, one of the oldest barracks still in active use on Fort Riley. The building dated back to the early 1900s, its brick walls and narrow corridors testament to a different era of military architecture. Chen had walked these hallways 100 times during night watch, his boots echoing on worn linoleum, his flashlight cutting through the darkness while soldiers slept in their bunks. Nothing ever happened. Until tonight. He was on the 2nd floor when he saw the chair move. A heavy wooden chair, the kind issued to every barracks room for decades, sitting in the hallway outside the latrine. It didn't slide or tip. It moved with purpose, gliding smoothly across the floor for a solid 3 feet before stopping dead. No vibration in the floor beneath Chen's boots. No wind. No strings. No rational explanation. He froze, hand instinctively moving to his sidearm, his training warring with the impossibility of what he'd just witnessed. Then he saw the tail. Thick and jet black, sleek and muscular like a panther's, it slipped around the corner at the end of the hallway with fluid grace. The tail was perhaps 5 feet long, moving with obvious intent, attached to something Chen couldn't see. He followed because that's what MPs do. You investigate. You don't run. His hand stayed on his weapon, though some part of his mind knew bullets wouldn't help against whatever that was. The hallway was empty. No animal. No soldier playing some insane prank at 2 in the morning. Just fluorescent lights humming overhead and his own rapid breathing. He checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding space. Nothing. The creature with the black tail had vanished. Directly below Chen's position, in a room on the 1st floor, Private James Rodriguez was experiencing his own nightmare. He'd gone to bed exhausted after a 14-hour shift, fell asleep immediately, then woke to absolute terror. His body was paralyzed, completely unresponsive no matter how hard he tried to move. A crushing weight pressed down on his chest, making it difficult to breathe, and hovering above him in the darkness was a mass, formless but solid, darker than the shadows around it. 2 red pinprick eyes stared down at him, with what felt like malicious intelligence. Rodriguez tried to scream, but his jaw wouldn't move, tried to reach for the light, but his arms were dead weight. The entity stayed there for what felt like hours, but was probably seconds, watching him with those burning eyes, before dissolving into nothing. His body unfroze all at once, and he gasped, rolling out of his bunk, turning on every light in the room with shaking hands. Neither soldier knew about the other's experience. They didn't speak until the next morning at formation, when exhaustion and belly-controlled fear made them break protocol and compare notes. Chen described the moving chair and the black tail. Rodriguez described the crushing weight and the red eyes. The details clicked together with horrifying precision. The timing matched. The locations were directly above and below each other. Building 223's records showed it had been used as overflow housing during the 1918 influenza pandemic, when soldiers were dying faster than the hospital could process them, when bodies were stacked in hallways waiting for burial details that couldn't keep pace with death. Specialist David Morrison and his wife Sarah moved into their first base housing unit in June with the kind of excitement young couples have when starting their lives together. David had just returned from deployment. They'd gotten married 6 months earlier, and this was their first real home. Not an apartment, not temporary quarters, but a place with a yard and neighbors and permanence. The house was one of the older units on post, built in the 1960s, but it was theirs. The first 2 weeks were perfect. Week 3, David deployed again for a training rotation overseas. Sarah was alone when she heard him screaming. The sound came from the kitchen, raw, agonized screaming like someone being tortured. She ran from the bedroom, heart hammering, expecting to find her husband somehow back early and injured. The kitchen was empty. Silent. Not even the hum of the refrigerator broke the stillness. She checked her phone with shaking hands. David's location showed him in Germany, 7 time zones away. She'd heard him screaming in agony from an empty room while he slept peacefully thousands of miles away. When David returned 2 weeks later, Sarah didn't tell him. She convinced herself it had been a nightmare. Stress. Her imagination working overtime in an unfamiliar house. Then David experienced it. He woke at 3 in the morning to Sarah's voice crying out in pain from the bathroom, a desperate, sobbing wail that sent him scrambling out of bed. He burst through the bathroom door ready to help and found it dark and empty. Sarah was asleep in bed beside him, exactly where she'd been when he'd lost consciousness moments before. He checked her. Peaceful, breathing steadily, completely unaware, but his ears were still ringing from the volume of her screams. They compared notes the next morning over coffee, both exhausted, both terrified. That's when the visual manifestations began. David woke one night to see Sarah standing in their bedroom doorway, backlit by the hallway light, watching him. He could simultaneously feel her body pressed against his back as she slept. The standing figure's eyes were wrong. Too wide, too unblinking, watching with an intensity Sarah never had. He blinked and she dissolved like smoke. Sarah encountered him 3 days later in the hallway outside their bedroom. She smiled and said good morning. His voice answered from the living room. Morning, babe. And she turned to see him sitting on the couch reading his phone. The figure in the hallway smiled wider, an expression her husband had never made, all teeth and wrong angles, before dissolving into nothing. The entity was learning them. It had their voices perfect now, could mimic their mannerisms, their walks, their expressions. It used their forms against each other, appearing as one while the real version was elsewhere, creating a psychological warfare that left them questioning every interaction. Was that really David coming through the door or something wearing his face? Was Sarah actually calling from upstairs, or was it the thing that lived in their walls? They started sleeping with every light in the house on, burning through bulbs and electricity bills, because darkness meant doubt. They questioned every sound, every movement, unable to trust their own senses in a home that should have been their sanctuary, but had become a hunting ground for something that wore their faces like masks. February 2013. Sergeant First Class Robert Hayes drew the short straw for night watch at the Custer Hill housing complex during what the Weather Service was calling a historic snowstorm. Visibility was near zero, fat flakes falling so thick and fast that Hayes could barely see 15 feet in any direction. The temperature had dropped to single digits, and the wind cut through his cold weather gear like it wasn't even there. He was making his rounds through the complex, checking that families were secure and that no pipes had burst, when he heard the hammering. It came from Unit 34, his neighbor's house 3 doors down from his own quarters. The sound was violent, aggressive, the kind of desperate pounding that meant emergency. Someone was hammering on the front door with enough force to rattle it in its frame, the impacts echoing across the snow-muffled night with sharp clarity. Bang, 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 bang. Relentless, furious, the rhythm of someone in crisis demanding entry. Hayes broke into a run, his hand automatically moving to his sidearm. Domestic dispute, medical emergency, someone locked out in sub-zero temperatures. His training cycled through possibilities as he covered the distance. The hammering continued for a full 30 seconds, each impact loud enough that Hayes' ears rang from the volume even from 20 feet away. He reached the porch with his weapon drawn, ready to intervene in whatever crisis was unfolding. The porch was empty. Not just empty, pristine. Fresh snow covered every surface in an unbroken blanket of white. The porch, the steps, the walkway leading to the street, all virgin snow without a single footprint. No one had approached this door. No one had stood here hammering. But Hayes had heard it, was still hearing the echo of it in his ears, the sound so loud and close it had seemed almost inside his own head. He knocked on the door, softer than the phantom hammering but insistent. The family inside, a captain, his wife, and 2 young kids, came to the door looking confused and concerned but not frightened. No, they hadn't heard any knocking. No one had tried to get in. Their door showed no sign of impact, no dents or scuff marks that would indicate the kind of violent pounding Hayes had witnessed. They invited him in to check their house, concerned he might be suffering from cold-related confusion. He checked anyway, knowing what he'd find. Nothing. The house was warm, quiet, normal, but his ears were still ringing. Hayes filed a report the next morning, documenting the incident in the dry, factual language the Army required. His sergeant read it, made a non-committal sound, and filed it away. But Hayes kept digging. Unit 34's housing records showed 3 previous families had broken their leases early over the past 18 months, abandoning the unit mid-contract and moving to off-post housing at their own expense. Each family cited unbearable living conditions in their exit paperwork, but refused to provide details, even when pressed by housing officials. One wife had written a single sentence in the explanation section, before crossing it out so violently the pen tore through the paper. Something is wrong with this house. That was all. No one would say more, as though speaking about it might make it worse, might bring it with them wherever they went next. Major Rebecca Chen, a trauma surgeon at Irwin Army Community Hospital, woke at 0600 to the sound of her toddler twins babbling in their room. She made coffee, got herself presentable for the day, then walked down the hallway to get her daughters ready for daycare. She opened their bedroom door and stopped cold. Every piece of their bedding, crib sheets, blankets, quilts, pillows, stuffed animals, had been stacked in a perfect tower reaching from floor to ceiling. The construction was geometrically precise, each item balanced with mathematical exactness, creating a structure at least 7 feet tall. Her daughters, barely 2 years old, were sitting in their cribs watching the tower with wide eyes, having clearly just woken up. Chen stood in the doorway, trying to process what she was seeing. The tower would have taken hours to construct. It required adult height to place items at the top. The precision was beyond casual explanation. each stuffed animal positioned at exact angles, each blanket folded and placed with deliberate care. Her daughters couldn't have built this. They'd been asleep when she'd checked on them at midnight, both lying in their cribs under their blankets. Those same blankets were now incorporated into a structure that defied the physical capabilities of toddlers. Chen felt the hairs on her neck stand up. Something had been in her daughter's room while they slept, handling their belongings, building this impossible tower, demonstrating that it could reach them anytime it wanted. Across the base in Normandy housing, Captain Eric Martinez returned from a week-long training exercise at Fort Leavenworth to find his kitchen transformed into something from a nightmare. Every canned good in his pantry, over 60 items, had been opened, not haphazardly, but methodically. The contents had been emptied into neat piles organized by type on his kitchen counter, vegetables in one pile, soups in another, beans, fruits, all separated with clinical precision. The empty cans were arranged on the floor in perfect concentric circles, labels facing outward, creating a pattern that looked almost ritualistic. Martinez stood in his kitchen, still wearing his travel uniform, trying to understand what he was seeing. His house had been locked. He'd checked his security cameras on his phone throughout the week. No alerts, no motion detected, no evidence of entry. The food arrangement would have required hours of methodical work, someone opening each can carefully, separating contents, positioning empty cans with geometric accuracy. But his cameras showed nothing. Not a single frame of anyone entering his house, moving through his kitchen, creating this impossible display. Both families reported the same unsettling detail in their statements to housing officials. It wasn't just the impossibility of what had happened, it was the feeling that accompanied it. They felt watched, observed by something that wanted them to know it had been there. The precision wasn't accidental. It was a message. The entity had invaded their homes, handled their most personal belongings, demonstrated complete access to their private spaces, and done so with such meticulous care that coincidence or accident was impossible. This was intentional. This was a demonstration of power. Something at Fort Riley was letting military families know that their locks, their cameras, their precautions meant nothing. It could enter whenever it wanted, touch whatever it wanted, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Irwin Army Community Hospital should be a place of healing, of rationality, where science and medicine provide answers to every question. But the night shift staff know better. They know that after midnight, when the hallways are dim and most patients are sleeping, the hospital remembers what it was built on top of. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was working triage when the 911 call came through at 0230. A child screaming, medical emergency, parents unresponsive. The caller's voice was panicked, female, describing a pediatric crisis that required immediate response. Mitchell dispatched an ambulance and pulled up the address to relay information to the crew. Her screen froze her blood. The house had been vacant for 6 weeks, utilities disconnected, no family assigned. She radioed the ambulance. Proceed with caution, possible false alarm. The crew arrived to find the house dark, locked, and completely empty. No child, no parents, no furniture, no sign anyone had been inside for months. But the 911 call was real, recorded in the system, a woman's desperate voice begging for help from an empty house. Down the hall in the on-call room, Captain Jennifer Torres was trying to catch 20 minutes of sleep between surgeries. The room was small, windowless, the door locked from the inside. She'd just closed her eyes when she felt it, a sharp poke in her back, right between her shoulder blades. She turned, expecting to see a colleague who'd somehow gotten in, needing her for an emergency. The room was empty. The door was still locked. Before she could process this, the poking came again, harder this time, insistent invisible fingers jabbing into her back with increasing force. She felt each individual poke, felt the pressure of fingertips pressing into her muscle tissue. The poking intensified, becoming painful, aggressive, moving up and down her spine like something was testing where to hurt her most. Torres grabbed the door handle and fled to the hallway where other staff could see her, refusing to be alone with whatever was in that room. Colonel David Park, chief of surgery, had taken to arriving an hour before his first scheduled procedure to check the operating rooms. Too many times he'd found equipment rearranged overnight, surgical instruments laid out in patterns that resembled human bodies, scalpels and forceps positioned where limbs would be, surgical drapes arranged like shrouds covering the invisible forms. The cleaning staff swore they left everything in standard configuration. Security cameras showed the rooms empty all night. But every few weeks, Park would open an OR and find this macabre display waiting for him. The hospital's official history noted it was built in 1962, but records showed it occupied the exact site of the original 1918 influenza pandemic field hospital. That temporary facility had been overwhelmed within days of the outbreak, with death rates so catastrophic that bodies were stacked in hallways awaiting burial details that couldn't keep pace. Hundreds of soldiers died in makeshift wards where Irwin now stood, their final moments marked by the distinctive death rattle of fluid-filled lungs struggling for air. The medical professionals who worked night shift, people trained in empirical evidence and scientific explanation, who'd seen every form of human trauma and learned to compartmentalize, found themselves unable to rationalize what happened in their workplace after dark. When fluorescent lights flickered for no reason, when the ventilation system carried sounds that might be breathing, might be whispers, might be the death rattles of soldiers who died a century ago in rooms that occupied the same space. The dead had never left Irwin Army Community Hospital, and they wanted the living to know it.